All right, we're together today, and I have about 6 or 7 people in my office with me. We're talking today about the voice of the child. This is for Minors Council Classes 2021. We've discussed year after year about the voice of the child, and every time I talk about this, I've learned something new, and it's different. So I'm going to start by just asking, whose voice are you hearing when you first meet your client, when you first hear them speak to you? What I've learned over the years is that a lot of kids are very upfront, they're very honest, they're very open, but a lot of kids are facing a lot of pressure at home. They're very worried, and they will tell you something different than could be true. They may tell you something that's totally different than they're telling mom, totally different than they're telling dad, perhaps even totally different than they've told CPS or the police or anybody else that might have become involved in their lives because of this court case that they are now in the middle of. So, one of the things I listen for when I listen to the kids, I have read court pleadings already. One of the things I listen for is to see if the kids are parroting anyone. Did I hear mom say that? Did I see that she wrote that in her pleadings and the kids are repeating exactly, even sometimes the same words that a parent has said? The other thing I listen for is, are the kids' words appropriate for their ages? Sometimes kids will come in and they'll use words and I'll kind of butt in and I'll say, what does that mean? And they'll look at me with a blank look. And that may be on the first visit, and I do get to know my kids. I never visit kids once, and we do get better as we go along at trusting each other and understanding each other. But these things that I start looking for immediately are, okay, I'm listening, but whose voice am I really hearing? Is this mom's voice? Is this the child's voice? We've had a case before where baby sister absolutely parroted her older sister. And you'll hear a little bit later how I get to the bottom of all of this. But it's absolutely amazing how kids, when they're under pressure, will say what they think needs to be heard for some reason or another. So what do I do when I listen to the voice of a child? One thing you have to do is observe and assess. I have to read between the words. So what is it that you look for when reading between the words? And some kids are just really bad liars, and other kids are really good liars. But what do you look for? Sometimes I look for, when I've met the child once or twice or 3 times, has their story changed? And I've actually got a little boy right now who's involved in a criminal case against his dad. And the first time I met him, this child was adamant that in fact, he sat in my office and he goes, "What is abuse? What is abuse? You tell me what abuse is." And I said, "Well, what do you think abuse is?" And he talked to me about what he thought abuse was. The second time I met him, his story changed, and he said to me, "Well, I really don't remember what happened." The third time I met him, he said, "Well, my dad smarted off to me, so I smarted off back to him." And they had gotten in some kind of a confrontation in a grocery store. And it was telling to me that he said he thought he had the right to smart off back to his dad because his dad had smarted off to him. And as I got to know this family, I learned that the child was actually in therapy because of his mood swings and his bad behavior even in school. So the very first time you talk to a child and listen to a child, you may hear a story that makes you believe that a parent is abusing them, but you may gather a lot of information that tells you somebody else has told this child that's what's happened, or in fact, the child may have a personality disorder, bipolar disorder, even in kids, or maybe suffering, as a victim of abuse. Those are the kind of things we look for, and we do have to work out as we go through representing this child. So, reading between the words. When I interview kids, we've had other people talk today. Natalie Keller talked about she when she was minors counsel interviewed at school because it was a neutral place. I interview in my office. In every case until COVID, I went to both parents' homes. I have flown to Vancouver, Washington. I've flown to Atlanta, Georgia. I've flown to Colorado to be with kids while they're with a parent so that I can see the relationship between child and parent. And believe me, it's been eye-opening. I flew to Colorado with one case, and the mother in Colorado lived in a gorgeous, gorgeous home, was very wealthy. And when I got there, I saw that stepdad's relationship with the child and mother's relationship with the child was extremely controlling, even though my client was a teenager. And it was controlling to the point that the stepdad actually went out to my car where my husband was waiting for me and told my husband, who's not involved in this at all, why that child needed to remain in his care. And they were lovely people, but sometimes being lovely people doesn't go with the child's personality and needs. This child was so much like her father in personality, in looks, and really in everything that I think mother and stepdad might have resented that a little bit. And they certainly resented the fact that this teenager had a preference to be with dad. So interviewing in my mind with the parents present is very, very enlightening. I had a case one time, probably 10 years ago, where I met child and mother at a restaurant. And every time I tried to talk to the child, who was 3 seats down from me in the booth, mother would lean out so I couldn't talk to the child and he couldn't respond to me. She'd get right in the way so he couldn't see me and I couldn't hear him. Well, we met again at their home later. And even though this child was probably 10 or 11 at the time, she made him sit on her lap while we interviewed. And every time I'd ask her a question or him a question, she'd move that child so his face was right in front of her face. And it was really strange how she was very intent on even controlling how I was allowed to speak to the child. It was so obvious, and obviously not obvious to her. But, parents sometimes just don't get it when they're interfering and it's so obvious. My very first minors counsel case, which was 15 years ago, was the saddest case probably I've ever had. And it came out later that dad was sexually molesting girls in the case. But when I first met him, mother wasn't there. Father and 3 kids were in an attorney's office in the town where they lived. That's where I went to first meet them. Dad sat with the youngest daughter on his lap. And every time I asked him a question, he would move the daughter right in front of his face so I couldn't see him and I couldn't hear his answers. And as I went around the room and I asked the kids that I was just meeting, I'd ask very open questions, like, how are things with you today? Where are you living now? They would look at each other and go, shh, shh. Because I learned later, they were so afraid to divulge anything in front of dad. those kids are in their 20s now, and they're still my Facebook friends, and they still call me their guardian angel, and I love them and they love me. It's been a long, hard life for them. And it was a real eye-opening experience for me because, like I said, I was brand new minors counsel at the time, and I've probably never seen anything like that since. I've had cases where children were very open with me the very first time I met them. I had a terrible abuse case where I interviewed 3 kids. All 3 of them were just not hysterical, but close. That they could never even be in the same room with their dad again because he had abused them so badly. They all told me the same story separately, together, that he would come home at 2 o'clock in the morning and drag one of my clients down the hall by her hair to make her cook for him if he couldn't drag the mother out of her bedroom by her hair. Mother eventually put a lock on the children's door, and when they would hear dad coming home, they would rush to the children's bedroom and lock the door. I went to the house to look because they told me my dad used to try to kick in the door to get to us. So I went to the house. They showed me the door with a lock and the big hole in the bottom of the door. So when you listen, you have to listen hard, but you have to also be willing to understand maybe what the kids have gone through and why you're hearing the things that you're hearing and the way you're hearing them. You need to watch for body language. I already told you about how 2 parents expressed in their body language how they didn't want me interacting with their children. When kids come in my office, they may say one thing, but they may want something very different. I'm going to ask out here in my office, what do you watch for when kids are in your office and you're interviewing? And have you ever watched them when they're lying?
They don't look at you.
Yeah, they don't look at you. That's what I'm hearing. I've noticed kids get really fidgety. And if I might have a little one in my office with an older sibling, the first time I meet, just to make the younger one feel comfortable, they'll turn and look at the older sibling just to see if it's okay if I talk. And that's what went on in the office, in the other attorney's office when I was interviewing those 3 kids the first time with their dad. I later met with those kids alone. The stories that came out were absolutely frightening. But the first time or 2 that I met with them, they would still turn and say to the other kid, shh, shh, shh. It came out that there was a lot of horrible abuse, but they were so afraid to say it in the very beginning that it really made me know I needed to spend a lot more time with those kids to get to the bottom of what was going on. I have noticed in my office when I'm interviewing parents' body language. I had a mother sitting in my office with her daughter one day, and the mother was saying, I never tell my daughter that I don't like her dad. And then the mother rolled her eyes, and then she flipped her knee over the other way, crossed her knee over her leg the other direction, and crossed her arms. I never tell my daughter that. I always tell my daughter she should go and have a good time. So when we were all done with, the joint interview when I first met them, I said to the mom, do you know I can see your body language when you talk to me about certain things? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, when you talked to me with your daughter present, you said, I always go tell my daughter to have a good time with her dad. I said, she saw that. I saw it. And she just looked at me shocked. When I had my interview with the child alone about a week later in my office, the very first words out of her mouth were, my mom didn't know she did that. So what does that tell you? That tells me that mom is going home and discussing the case and the relationship between mom, dad, and child. And it may still not be good. It sounded like the child was coming back in and defending mother to me. So those are the kind of things that you have to sort of observe right at the beginning is your child's body language, parents' body language, whether their statements change from a first appointment to a second appointment to a third appointment. I had a case early on where the parents were absolutely sure that something was wrong, but they didn't know what. This child was telling her mother that her father was sexually abusing her during dad's visits. Telling her that. When I visited with mom, that was always said. When I visited with a child in my office with dad, she cuddled with her dad. There was absolutely no indication there was anything wrong between daughter and father. This is where you learn to involve experts. So what I decided to do is I'm not going to get to the bottom of this. I called a local therapist and asked her, and she said, well, let's set up a meeting in my office. We'll bring both parents. We'll bring the child. I'd like you to be here. She set up the appointment. The parents were eager to do this. They wanted to get to the bottom of this. And when we all went in, she told the child, this is a no lies meeting here. No lies. So it came out in that meeting that the child admitted mother's mother was telling her to tell everybody that dad had been sexually molesting her. And this little girl was only like 5. But it was really, really disheartening to mother to have been blaming father, but to also know that her mother was the one telling her own child what to say. Now, if I had only listened to the voice of the child and done nothing more, where would we have gotten? Really nowhere. It's really important, and it's part of our directives as Minors Council to involve experts when we need to do that. I've asked the court to appoint therapists a number of times for my kids, for the family, to help me get to the bottom of certain things. I probably had 4 or 5 cases now where I brought in the method of no lies here meetings. I had a case like that out of Riverside where the mother's family was extremely wealthy and the father was not poor, but he was just working class. And we had to have a no lies meeting because the mother's father was extremely concerned that father was abusing the 2 little boys. When we had the no lies meeting, it came out that mother's boyfriend was actually sexually molesting the 2 little boys. And he had actually done it in maternal grandfather's home in the same room when grandfather was present. They were all watching a movie in the dark. And that case was really involved because I had to go to the maternal grandfather's home. It was gorgeous in Riverside Hills. And when actually, this is interesting, I actually brought in a polygraph detector, and the boyfriend said, of course I'll take a polygraph test. Of course I will. Well, he flunked it. And that's what convinced the maternal grandfather. And we couldn't admit that information into court. And I'll never forget the judge when I put in my report, what had happened. He goes, well, that's not admissible in my courtroom, but your Minors Council report is very thorough, and that is. Eventually, it's interesting. The mother and father got back together. And the kids were darling boys, but they had been through a lot while the parents were separated. So I think when you listen to your children that you represent, you also have the responsibility to investigate why they are saying specific things. We have cases all the time where kids are so pressured, it just is absolutely heartbreaking. So I've talked about body language of both the parents and the kids. I always watch for the kids' emotions, watch for anxiety, watch for fidgeting. We have a case right now, and it's not mine, but I'm involved in the case where the child is a teenager. He is so angry with his father. He's grown up in a very abusive relationship with his father. It's just now coming out. It's been a case that's been in the courthouse a long time, many years. The kid is probably now 15 and a half or 16 and a half. He is so angry with his father that even though he has a minors counsel, not me, who is recommending some kind of reconciliation, that child is absolutely not going to do it. Recently, he went to live with his mom full time, and the judge said to Dad, "Your son wants to take his things back to Mom's house." And Dad said, "I'll put him in my driveway. He can pick him up. I'll put him out in the street and he can pick him up." And Judge said, "No, you're not going to put him out in the street." And I mean, that's the kind of response this child got because he didn't want to be with Dad at this time. And that's the kind of thing some of these kids go through. So you're going to sometimes represent kids who are so angry because of legitimate abuse, like my kids who were dragged down the hall by their hair when they were little. So you need to watch for their emotions. You're going to see anxiety, you're going to see anger, you're going to see fear. Let me just ask, why do you think you might see fear in kids?
The unknown. Yeah.
Okay.
The truth.
Fear of the unknown. I had a child recently who had a CPS case. She had been to the doctor several times with numerous bruises on her body. Mother, during a visit, got a protective order against Dad, even though Dad had custody. I talked to the child a couple of times, and I had to do it on Zoom because she doesn't live in this state right now. Normally, I'd fly there. But the first time she talked to me, she was really open. What a nice young lady. But when I asked her questions, I always ask open-ended questions. I never say, "Did your dad beat you? Does your mom hit you?" You know, I always say, "Tell me about life here. Tell me about life here. Tell me about your relationship." We'll get to that in just a minute further on. But open-ended questions, she was really, really open with me. And she said, "Yeah, when I came to," she didn't even know there was a protective order, so I'll leave that at that. But yeah, when I came here, I had a lot of bruises. And I said, "Well, how did you get the bruises?" And she wouldn't really answer me. And finally I finally broke down and I said, "Is somebody hitting you?" And she went, "No." You know, she had to think about it. "No." Well, after subsequent interviews, I found out that her dad was an alcoholic and dragging her down the hall and up the stairs and grabbing her really hard, and that she was getting bruised multiple ways, but not by being hit. She wouldn't let me disclose that to the judge because she doesn't want her dad to go to jail. She doesn't want her dad to get in trouble. She wants to be able to see her dad in the future, but she was very open when he stops drinking. So as I go down my talk a little bit further, we're going to talk about when you can disclose and when you can't. But that's one of the things you're going to look for is anxiety. Sometimes kids are so anxious. Like I said before, they'll turn to other kids that they might be with and they'll tell them to be quiet. Or they'll, just really look like they're choking when they talk to you. Sometimes kids are just so anxious, their hands are going, or they're sitting in their chair so tight they don't know what to do. One of the things that I do when I bring kids in here is put them at ease. When I first met kids, I'd sit on the floor with them. I can't get up anymore, so I don't do that. But I'll go sit in a chair right next to them. And I'll meet them at the park. Sometimes I talk to the kids in my parking lot if they're just coming to see me, at a visitation exchange. I'll stay in my car. They'll come over and talk to me for just a minute where nobody else can hear. But you need to make your kids comfortable. I have a big bin in my waiting room, and it used to be full of stuffed animals. And when little kids would come for their first visit to meet me, they always got their choice of stuffed animal. And I was really shocked. I had a family of 4 kids come to see me about a month ago. And even the 13-year-old boy, he wanted one of those stuffed animals, and he left with one under his arm. So it's a comfort thing. I always want the kids to feel comfortable with me in my office, talking to me. And I think that one of the things you can help to do to relieve their anxiety and settle their emotions is to, when you're introducing yourself, be calm and let them know this is not a scary place. This is not going to, nothing that's happening from talking to me and getting to know me and working with me. Things are going to be okay. They may not exactly be exactly what you think is going to happen. It may not be exactly what you want to happen, but what's going to happen is going to help you to be healthy and happy in the future. And we're going to try to work all the problems out, okay? I never tell them that we will, but I tell them that we will really try hard to do that. When kids come in and talk to me when I'm listening and observing and assessing, one of the things I listen for is if they're using words they don't even know what they mean. I had a child in here. She's one of 3 kids. She was in here probably 2 weeks ago, and she said something to me. I can't even remember what it was now. And I said to her, "What does that mean?" And she looked at me, she goes, I don't know. So I've had to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, meeting with mom, meeting with dad, meeting with mom, meeting with dad, meeting now with family members to see if I can help to get a better picture of the parents' backgrounds and thought processes and pressure on kids to see where this is coming from. And it's really 100% different than I thought it was at my first meeting. 100% different. I am in shock, really. I had my last meeting with a parent yesterday, and I'm really shocked at what I have seen from what the kids told me the very first meeting. And I've probably had about 5 or 6 meetings with this family so far, and I'm in awe at what change I've seen in a period of 2 months. What I've learned, not what is changed in the family dynamics, but what I've learned about the family dynamics and what I believe the first meeting. Sometimes you have to confirm what you're observing or what you're assessing or what you're listening to. I have a couple of cases right now that we learn a lot in Minors Council. We learn about personality disorders. We learn about abuse. We learn about domestic violence. And we take these classes year after year after year. And I also take classes on parent coordinator. I take classes online about alienation. We don't use that word anymore, but target parents and resistance to visitation. And I literally probably take 40 to 50 to 60 hours of continuing education classes every year. So Minors Council really does grow to understand and recognize when parents have personality or emotional or mental issues. We cannot diagnose. I would never, never do that. But when I recognize, that's when I go and I ask for involvement of an expert. So sometimes judicial officers know what I'm trying to say, and sometimes they don't. And it's very, very difficult when you have a case. Am I running out of time? When you have a case and it's so obvious that you have a parent with a real disorder and the judge doesn't see it. I have a case where in the middle of the night, a parent will text child, your mother's dead, your mother's dead, your mother's dead. And then 5 minutes later, oh, maybe your mother's not dead, maybe your mother's not dead, maybe she's still alive. There have been 2 or 3 suicide attempts on that parent's part, allegedly. 1 at least for sure. Extreme behavior that's not okay. Getting in physical altercations with other people in the family around the kids. Threatening restraining orders against the dad all the time. I've been now reported to the bar. I've had bar complaints made against me by her at least 3 times. And even her mother is the world's biggest witch. She doesn't get along with her mother. I feel sorry for this woman. She needs to get help. She has an attorney who doesn't recognize what's wrong. We have a judge who's finally given her only supervised visits, but it's been a year and a half to get there. One of her kids gets text messages up until this was stopped, would get text messages every day. F you, F you, F you, F you. You're not my child anymore. I mean, it was awful. I have a case now where the judge, somebody else who was on the case, the court clerk's mother, me, everybody's being sued and allegedly going to be sued in federal court just because mother has lost custody. Minors Council is not easy. Minors Council is stressful, but it all goes back looking at why do these kids have anxiety? Why do these kids have issues? Why are they afraid to speak up? Noting the background they come from, I think Minors Council needs to open their eyes wide and understand why kids say what they do. They know that there's something wrong with mom. In this one particular case where mom now has supervised visits, the child that gets these text messages, F you, F you, F you, F you, is so afraid mother's going to attempt suicide that if child isn't there, mother will. Child has to fix the situation. So I've brought in an expert. I've asked the court to bring in an expert in that case. The entire family is in family therapy. There's been a diagnosis because the therapist is a doctor. And that's the only reason now that mother has only supervised visits. Other experts that I have brought in have been marriage and family therapists, and we have great marriage and family therapists for kids, for adults, for families. We have solutions for families here. It's wonderful to help parents recognize when they do things, when they fight, what it does to their kids, how it affects the kids' emotions, their outlook in life, their future, all of those things. So when you're minors counsel, do not be afraid to call an expert. I had a case, and this is one I've already talked about, but this is a different issue. Mother was allowed to have phone calls, and it was so bad that she was cut down to having phone calls, and Dad was allowed to tape. So Mother taped this phone call. Is he hitting you again? Is she hitting you again? I have to see you to check for bruises. Did he hit you again? That went on for a few minutes. Finally, Dad ended the phone call because the kid's crying. You're crying because he's hitting you, aren't you? You're crying because he's hitting you. Dad cut off the phone call. I actually was sent a copy of that by Dad, and without ever consulting them first, except to say, would you mind reviewing this phone call and give me your thought? I sent it to 2 Psych Ds in the San Bernardino Riverside area who are not involved in the case, not doing anything for me on other cases. And I said, would you just give me your opinion on this? Because I don't want to have the only opinion and go in and be wrong. I got a really nice letter from one of the doctors, and it took a while. It took probably a week till I got it back, about how that was so destructive to a child. And the other person emailed me and said, you obviously have a parent who can't see life through their child's eyes. They have no idea what they're doing to their child. They need education about that, and they need to stop it for the child's benefit until they become educated. I went to court. That parent, I filed an ex parte because this has been a case that's been, unfortunately, hearing after hearing. And this is a case where everybody's getting sued in federal court, or allegedly. And it's just one of those cases where child loves mom, but cannot deal with the stress of the relationship with mom. She's not a well child. And it's really a hard decision and a hard person to be, to explain to child, I know you love your mom. I really want you to see your mom. I worked through FaceTime. I worked through supervised visits. She and I came up with every, solution we could come to. And now there are no visits. Oh, one of the other people she's going to sue is a visitation supervisor. So it's so hard to be minors counsel for a child when you and the experts have no solution. And there are cases like that. And I'm telling you, I'm seeing so many more of those cases now than I did in the beginning of my law career. So I made up a little second page on my handout about how to gather information relevant to the child's voice when you're first meeting. I find this is kind of interesting because my husband and I got custody of his daughter when she was young. And we met with my stepdaughter's therapist at the time, and the stepdaughter's therapist had done this. Have the child draw a picture of his or her family. What might that tell? Who's the boss? Who's left out? Who's bigger than the others? Well, my stepdaughter drew this picture where she lived with her mom. She drew her mom, she drew her stepdad, she drew the kids, and she drew a picture of herself up here, not down on the level where the house and the other people were. She didn't picture herself as part of that family. So that's one of the things you can do, is have your kids draw a picture of, and they don't know why they're drawing it the way they do. They don't put themselves out in Never Never Land, on purpose. Have the child describe his or her feelings at the time of your visit and before the visit. It's interesting too, sometimes kids will come in here and they'll sit at my desk on the other side and they'll color. Oh, this is my dad. And it's scribbled. Might be scribbled red, it might be scribbled black, it might be scribbled purple. This is my mom in yellow sun. Or it might be the other way around. So it's really, really interesting to let kids not only talk, but act in front of you. Just because they scribble dad out doesn't mean he's done anything wrong. It's their belief at this time that he has. That's your job to get to the bottom of it. All right? So you ask open-ended questions. How are you feeling? They may say I'm feeling empty, or they may be really happy and say I feel silly. These are the kind of things that are really helpful to ask kids when you ask them to describe their feelings. And I've learned that I have to be really careful with the look on my face when I'm asking too, because if I'm smiling or laughing, that may come back at me when they're really not feeling so good. So, I always let them know, hey, I really want to find out some things. Let's talk. It's not, I'm not trying to lead them somewhere by the way I'm acting. What I've also found is that you can ask, and this is a child taught me this. This is the child who was all bruised that was talking to me on Zoom last week. Explore situations that make someone at home act like a volcano. She's the one that used that word when she was talking to me about her dad. Ask them if there are situations at home when people in their family might act like a chicken, running around with their head cut off or something, or laughing like a hyena. Because some kids will come in and they'll say, my family, we sit around and we play games and we laugh like crazy on Saturday nights. The child who described her dad as a volcano also told me on Saturday nights, we sit around playing games and we laugh like hyenas. But you know what? My dad's not drinking then. So it's really important for you to listen to the whole scenario when they're talking to you about the situation. Discuss with them their happy and unhappy places in their minds. And this word, you would think this is only with little kids. It's not. This goes all the way up to teenagers. I have a grandson who's in college, and he called yesterday and he goes, I am not in a happy place in my mind today. So don't be afraid to ask kids of any age where their happy place is in their mind and where their unhappy place is in their mind, because it may really surprise you. It's really important. Discuss what might cause a child to worry, and then put numbers on there while you're first learning to, meet these kids. What makes them worry? Dad's drinking, a 10. Mom's drinking, a 10. Dad's temper, a 10. So, lots of times they'll say, well, I don't like I've had cases where kids have been left alone at home. They wake up in the middle of the night and they're at home alone. Scared them to death. And it was not one time, it was sort of a routine. They realized, hey, I woke up last week and I was home alone at 2 a.m. And then I woke up again this week at 2 a.m. I found out I was alone. It became a big issue in the case. So discuss what might cause a child to worry or be anxious or be scared. I'd be afraid to be left at home alone. I'd be afraid to be away from my mom or my dad. And I'm not going to talk much more, but I will tell you, there are kids. My family, my sister was enmeshed with my mother. She could not be away from my mother. And I loved both my parents. I really did. But people would come over to my house when I was a kid, And my sister would sit next to my mother and not let anybody else sit next to her. And it got to the place where even when she was a teenager in college, people would look because it was so obvious. And my mom was a great mom. It's not that she realized what was happening, but my dad was in Vietnam 5 times when I was in high school and college. So my sister was quite a lot younger than I, and she grew up really, really bonded to my mom, where I grew up bonded to both my parents. When you're minors counsel, you have to look at those kind of things. You have to look at those. I'm scared to sleep in a new place. I'm scared about going to a new school. So all of those things are things you need to talk to your kids about. You need to discuss with them because, in fact, am I running out of time? You have to discuss with them because it's a big possibility they might be going to a new school. They might be going to live in a new place, and they may not be happy about it. They may not know that they have a parent who's going to jail and they have to go somewhere else. They may not know that they have a parent who's just been convicted of domestic violence against another parent, and they're not going to continue to live with the parent they might want to live with. They don't understand why the law affects what they want. And as minors counsel, no, we are not therapists, but we have to explain why the law is affecting our kids the way it is when we're involved in the case. I just think it's so important for kids not to know the bad things about their parents, but they have to understand why certain things happen without a complete explanation of everything so that they're not blaming the wrong person. And that certainly happens in minors counsel cases. To disclose or not to disclose, one of the reasons you have to be careful about disclosing what you've been told is, first of all, your child may tell you that you can't. And then what happens? You can't. You can certainly advocate for your client in a way based upon things they've told you. You can advocate for your client based upon things that you see are in their best interest. But if your client tells you, you can't tell anybody what I just told you, you can't tell the judge. You can only tell the judge, based upon my client's statements to me, I have concerns that lead me to advocate in this manner. Relationship concerns. We've talked about this just briefly. If you disclose what mom or dad does or what you've seen at home, you've seen boyfriend beat up mommy, if they disclose and you tell the judge, kids are frequently afraid they're going to get beat up too. They, in my case where the daughter was dragged down the hall by her dad by her hair, starting at the age of 5, she was now about 16 or even 17 when I was appointed on that case. Her brother was 13 at that time, and he sat in my office and he cried and he said, I am so sad I never stood up to my dad to protect my sisters. Until the day that I was appointed, he got involved and it all came to a head because I don't know how they got an attorney, but all of it came out, and the brother had finally stood up to dad. But he sat here at the age of 13 and told me how sad he was that he'd been afraid all those years to stand up to his dad, that he was afraid he was going to get beaten up too. So kids may not want you to disclose, or you may not be able to disclose everything for fear of your client, for your client. You always have to do what's in your client's best interest, whether it's what your child wants or not. And I think when I talk about the voice of the child is what I'm trying to tell you today is not always what they say to you in words. It's what you read in their life history, in their current surroundings, their current situation. And you have to make the hard call about whether to read between their words or just go with their words. And I'll close with that.